Hi, I'm Jonathan, and today on a special edition of Hanging Out with the Guides, we are discussing sex, love, and relationships in a group panel discussion with love and relationship coach Angela Ambrosia in Sydney, Australia, and life, health, and love coach Mulan Reiter in Miami, Florida, and me, life guide Jonathan R. Wachtel in Kew Gardens, New York. So, love, sex, and relationships. What's the relationship among these topics? What do you see as the relationship being? Who wants to get started with this discussion first?
I'll jump in.
Go for it.
Uh, um, I see love, sex, and relationships as something that's constantly changing, but it's something that we're created from sex. Sex is a primal part of us as human beings, and love is the part of us that is like the more evolved aspect of the human consciousness or the brain. So if you look at other animals, they have emotions as well, but we're more complex and our emotional brain is much more evolved. So we've added to sex another element of love. And I think relationships is really about how we also add that spiritual aspect, because if we start to look at all of the problems or hard things that we go through in relationships, we actually start to learn and grow. And of course, we suffer as well. So sex is something that pulls us into an encounter or a relationship. Love is something where we build that meaning to it and exercise our higher capacity as a human. The relationships are where we really start to, it's like a journey or a process. We start to understand yourself, you understand how did I end up in this situation, and then how are you going to stay in the relationship? That's another big question I think a lot of people, especially today, are looking at, how to stay in a relationship, because it's so easy to just leave, especially in modern cultures. So that's what I see relationships as. They're always that ongoing process of what am I creating, who am I, and what is this relationship showing me about who I am, what I want, and if I'm not getting what I want, what am I feeling? What is that bringing up for me? So I've always found relationships much more complex than love and sex themselves, but they include all of that.
Um, I loved what you said, that we're created from the actual sex, that this is the way that human beings are created. I see the three are very connected, is very connected to one another. First of all, like you said, like this is very smart. Like the difference between animals and human beings is really the way I see it. The biggest difference is really the freedom of choice, right? The fact that we could have freedom of choice and we could choose who to arouse with, who to connect with, and who to build a relationship with, compared to animals, which are just, they put there. So I don't know much about it, but I could say that us as human beings, the fact that we have this freedom of choice allows us to connect to different people, and that has to do with chemistry and attraction. So when we are attracted to one another, that's easier to make a connection and to communicate. You could find yourself in a room with 100 people, and most likely some people will connect and some people won't, right? And there's a reason for it. The reason for it is that we are, it could be by, we are attracted to one another by our five senses. So it could be someone's smell, it could be someone's look, it could be the way someone sounds that you're attracted to. So you want to get more energy from, you want to get something out of this person. In terms of relationships, relationships are the best way to learn about yourself and who you are is through different relationships that you have in your life, and especially the one that you have with yourself. The one that you have with yourself, that's the most important relationship that you have. And you can learn about the relationship that you have with yourself through the relationship that you have with other people around you. In terms of sex, I see this as a whole different energy, I would call it. It's the same. It has to do with attraction and energy and chemistry. But it really depends on which way you take it. And a lot of people, I work with many females and males that they get confused very easily just by having this physical connection with one another. Then emotions come up and they get very confused, especially at the beginning of the relationship, right? Like when you meet someone and you're attracted to them, and these days, like everything is so fast and quick that we feel like the need to get connected with one another on a physical level. But once we get that physical level connected, then our judgment is put at risk. Especially us as women, I think you can relate to that more, that once we have that penetration, what happens is physically, emotionally, and spiritually, we get connected to the person. So then the judgment is just, it interferes with a clear, bright judgment. So it could either be a blessing, could be the most amazing thing because you drop the judgment, because who needs the judgment anyways, right? This is just, it interferes with just loving the person the way they are. On the other hand, it can really blind you. You could get this endorphins that release in the brain, like chemically. You have chemicals that are being released in the brain while you climax, and that can make you fall in love with a person without even knowing their soul and their true personality and who they are. So I could say as a woman, for me, when I see this with my clients, one of my biggest tips for my single clients is that when you meet a guy, you should avoid that physical connection, at least at the beginning of the relationship, so you could get to know each other better, so you will know if you want to connect in that level. Because once we connect in that level, what happens to men, and I think Jonathan can help us with that, men are hunters, and you have to let them work hard to hunt that thing that they need to hunt, and if you give it too soon, then they have no drive or no motivation. It's not true and accurate for 100% of the cases, but I could say that if we restrict ourselves from fulfilling that physical desire, then we can gain so much more in the long-term relationship. And then even if it's not going to be romantic or it's not going to be something that's going to last forever, at least you have a better opportunity to get to know the person before jumping into bed with them. Does that make sense?
I think it's interesting where this discussion is going, because I had no idea how this was going to go. I just set my intention for how I was going to feel afterwards. So I figured it's going to be a good discussion, and we'll see what happens. I hadn't thought about exactly what I would say as the relationship among these ideas, and then I got to hear each of you talk about it. Now I have all these thoughts, obviously. I really like the way Angela started. I was totally like, wow, that's interesting. I didn't even think about starting it that way. That like, which Mulan pointed out also, that we all come from sex. That's how we're all created. That's the beginning of us. And then it's interesting, obviously, where Mulan took this. The idea that there's that love that Angela presented, that love is like the broader version, or the more elevated version that sex is sort of part of. I'd like to expand on that idea, and obviously that relationships are more than that, but that stuff is wrapped up in it. And I'd also like to, it's going to be addressing what Mulan talked about in terms of the hunter and everything else. So, because obviously that calls for commentary. I think that ultimately, and obviously we could also throw attraction as another term in here. Mulan brought in, and that's a good additional term to be discussing here. That ultimately we begin from sex, and sex is like, sex can be one of two things. It can be the like, most basic form of connection, and it could be solely physical, or it can be the ultimate overflow of everything else. It can be something where love was involved, and it was this spiritual overflow, this like, intellectual connection, emotional connection, spiritual connection, and you're so connected to this other person, and ultimately so connected to yourself when you're with that person, which is why you would feel so connected to that person, that your relationship with yourself is that good, that you're on, like, intimate terms with yourself, and that you bring someone into your life from that place, and then sex becomes the ultimate, the pinnacle of that connection, that it's the overflow of everything else. But often, obviously, in this world, we go at it directly, and when we're going at it directly, then it doesn't involve all those other layers of connection. It's just the physical. And so that's the layer from which I would agree more with this evolutionary kind of, male as the hunter, that when sex is just the physical, is more of a physical connection, obviously then when we get involved too soon with someone, then we can, like Milan pointed out, we get confused. There are all these other, we could explain it brain-wise with all the different neurotransmitters. We could explain it in terms of hormones. We've got oxytocin making us feel relaxed and attracted, and dopamine in the ventral tegmental area of the brain, the pleasure center of the brain, and so we're feeling all this pleasure, and obviously associated with orgasm, and then there's serotonin when they're hugging us, and there's this happiness feeling, and so there are all these things that obviously we could call that confusing us, but it wouldn't confuse us if we recognize that our relationships with others are reflections of a relationship with ourselves. And if we recognize what we're experiencing with the other people as just reflections of what we're experiencing with ourselves, and we're not thinking of those as coming from the other person, then we can actually create relationships where sex is the ultimate pinnacle of the overflow of everything, rather than going at people where we're really looking for something from them, because we're not creating the relationship with ourselves that we want and then experiencing that reflected in them. We're just looking for pleasure, we're looking for connection, we're looking for something from the people. And then sex is like consuming, it's like trying to get something from the other person, and when relationships are based on that, then they tend to be volatile. So obviously, and they're not so stable, and it's it's all the physical attraction that keeps pulling you back in. It's interesting though, because then when we do start to develop deeper connections with people, then it becomes confusing if there's someone who fits our criteria in some form or other, when we're still figuring out our criteria for a relationship. And so then we often end up, when we start to feel connected to people, then we end up asking ourselves, is this someone I would want to be more than friends with? Is this the basis of that? Because at this point, this is the most connected I've ever felt with someone, so maybe this means there should be even more connection. And that's where there's a lot of confusion, because ultimately people come in to play certain roles for us. They reflect certain things, and when we're not on kissing terms with ourselves, and we kiss someone, then it like feels terrible. When we're not on sex terms with ourselves and we have sex with someone, then it's a terrible experience. It's only when we've built up to that level of connection with ourselves that it actually is a positive experience with another person, because then the connection with the other person is just the overflow of the connection with ourselves, and what we're attracted to in that person is really a reflection of what we're attracted to in ourselves, which is always the case with attraction. But then we're in a place where we're actually connecting to those things in ourselves, and it's not that we're wanting to, but we aren't, and we like the person because of what they show us that we don't have yet, instead that we like the person for what they show us we do have. And it feels really good to see the best aspects of ourselves reflected back, and supported by the other person, and it feels like this, this is what I want to connect more with. And then when it's the right kind of, context and relationship, and then we can throw in more terms, chemistry and everything else, then we can have sex and have it be a really positive thing. So now I'd love to hear you guys, build on that feedback, responses. I'm sure you guys have a lot of thoughts after each of the, we've all been talking here.
I just want to say I love the way you put it. I think it's amazing. Couldn't have put it better than the words you put it in, and I love it. I think one thing that is very important that I think sex is about, first of all, the fact that it's going to be like the peak of it, it's amazing, and I love that concept. I love this idea, because when you're truly connected to someone, then to connect on a physical level could really bring you into seventh heaven, and that's a place where everything is possible, when there is no time and no space, and it's just such a spiritual, beautiful place where you could stay there forever. And you just don't want to leave, and it's like a sense of creation. It's the seventh level of energy. It's the highest level of energy that you can reach. And actually, according to Kabbalah, the world was created in that energy. In the energy of seventh heaven, this is how the world was created. We were all one. Before this, the Big Bang, we were all one. We were all part of this one united soul. And when you connect in that level, you can feel that one united soul. And this is a priceless feeling where I wish to every person on earth to experience, because this is just such an amazing place to be at, where everything is possible. And I think what makes a sexual interaction a good interaction and is the energy that the people share. I think it's about sharing. I think is when you are with someone and you just want to share in terms of sharing. You don't want to share so you receive something back in return. You just want to give like you want to give out of yourself whatever you have, so the other person can be happy and fulfilled and have this pleasure. So you don't think about yourself, you think about the other person. The fact that what you said about like the inner, like if you give a kiss to someone but you're not willing to kiss yourself, this is so powerful. This is so powerful, because you see, in my work, what I focus on is helping people loving themselves more and find self-love. This sometimes it takes a lifetime to master this, right? Like we get better every day with loving ourselves more, making the right choices for us, if it's food choices, if it's the way we spend our time, if it's the people we come in touch with, if it's the relationships, if we could choose them, the work that we choose to do. Everything, it comes down to one thing, and that is self-love. The more you have love, the more you can give, right? I can't give something that I don't have. So I can't kiss someone unless I never thought about it this way, but I guess it's so true. I can't give someone that love if I can't find that myself. And you see, these days, sex could be such a technical, mechanical thing without any emotions and any thought behind it, that it could do more harm than good. And if that's okay with you, I want to tell you a short story about my client that I worked with a year ago. She's amazing. I love her so much. We worked together for 6 months, and she has a very flirty personality. So when you see her, when you meet her, it's like very easy to flirt with her, because this is the way she carries herself. And we talked a lot about commitment issues and the fact that she wants to be in a relationship, and she was struggling with this big time. And then we said, you know what? Let's take a challenge. And we picked up a time during the year, a 40 days period of time, where she restricted completely everything that has to do with men and flirting, texting, dating, everything. We call it the man fast. So in this period of time of 40 days, this is a true story, and it's amazing. You will see how it ends, and you would be fascinated as well. For a short period of time of 40 days, she couldn't text, she couldn't email, she couldn't talk to someone, or even like if she met someone, she would be like, "Hi, nice to meet you," not even a handshake, okay? Like it was that much. And she decided to go on a 40-day cleanse with men, and in the 40th day, someone contacted her in New York, and they started having this conversation on the phone. They couldn't get physical, right? Because he was in New York and she was here in Florida. So they started talking on the phone. And you know, by the end of this time, she was like about to explode. Like she really wanted to make this connection, to make it happen. She was 28, she wanted to get married, she wanted to find love. And she met this guy, and they started to have this long distance relationship. And 4 months after, they got married. So, meaning that I know it sounds crazy and unbelievable, but after a month they were together in contact with each other because they couldn't get physical. Only after a month, that's when they met. And the learnings that she had from this period of time where she wasn't in touch with any other men and didn't flirt and anything, she restricted herself so much that when the right man came, she could have recognized this. She didn't have this screen of flirtation, or, you know, feeling like getting this attention from someone. So just getting attention from someone just to take that advantage, to take this opportunity. She had like a very clear mind and a clear heart and a true desire. That's how she cleansed all this negative, toxic energy that came into her life in a 40-day cleanse. Today, it's been a year and a little bit more than a year that she's married, and she's pregnant and about to give birth in 3 months. So the reason I tell you this story is because, and I see this in any other area of your life, if you truly, truly, truly want something, you have to be willing to sacrifice something else. There's a reason, like there's a pattern why things don't work, why people can't find a mate, why they don't attract the right person, because they keep repeating the same mistake over and over and over and over and over again. So once you recognize that mistake, you can clear that root cause and then choose a new behavior. Once you choose a new behavior, you could detach from the problem, like get outside of your environment, and then create a new behavior based on a clear mind and not on some sort of a default process that you just go through because this is how you used to live your life. And I hope we can all learn from this story, because I think it's one of the most amazing stories that I've ever experienced with all my clients, and it works. If you have something that you want love, you restrict the love that you give just for random people, for strangers. Like there is no reason to, to come in touch and give some of that physical interaction to someone who you don't feel that deep connection with, because eventually you just give out some energy just for nothing, and then you stay empty, and you miss out the whole point, which is bigger than that, right? Because sex could be amazing, it could be wonderful and beautiful, but it would never lead you to seventh heaven unless you have that true connection and that true desire to just connect on that level.
I love the man fast. I love having like a focus, and I really love, Mulan, how you like saying take yourself out of the old pattern by doing something totally new, like a different behavior. Because that's the problem when you get so wrapped up in a desire for a sexual bond. Like some of the women I work with are older, who've had several relationships already, or marriages, divorces, and they know the trap of getting hooked into a relationship because you have a sexual connection and then you think it's an emotional bond and then you end up in a relationship. and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And they've lived with this person, built up a lot of resentment, and then they find themselves in a habit mentally, emotionally, and also with some sort of sadness about, well, I chose a person and it didn't work, and I lost something. So that's really like when you've got someone who's been through relationships, the only way to really like get out of the old cycle that you're with is to totally go a different path. And I really like that whole fasting, like fast from that old behavior. Just don't do that and do something different. And you'll notice when people break up, they go out and do totally different things. They wash that person out of their hair, and it's important. But I like, instead of washing that person out of your hair, like totally do a whole different shift of your behavior and take yourself into a different mode of being. I wanted to address the piece on kissing yourself because I was very fascinated as a child with sensuality, and I was raised very conservatively as a Catholic Italian girl in Australia. My parents were very traditional, not so much Catholic, but Italian, which is actually not just Catholic. You can't do anything your parents say you can't do. You have to do exactly what they want. You have to please them. You have to. There's a word in Italian like deve. Have to. You must. So that was bigger for me than being Catholic. And I felt extremely, how can I describe it, in my body when it came to being intimate with a man for the first time, frightened. So for me, it's not possible to just kiss yourself. Sex and intimacy is about exploring the potential of what's possible when you kiss someone or touch someone. There's a magic about, I don't know what this is, and I'm experiencing something foreign and new and different. And it was scary for me, but also new and exciting and different. So there's something always vulnerable in that intimate connection. Like you don't know how to kiss yourself. You don't know how to have sex with yourself. That's what's so exciting and wonderful about having a sexual connection with someone. And in that process, you're going to learn how your body likes to be pleasured, and you're going to learn how to just experience the person who's not you. It's very different when you have a different body with you. It's like, oh, wow, like now I can experience the new feeling in my body because of your body. And if you've been with different partners, you'll know that you are different with a different partner. So that's the part in sex that's a little bit like, why it's so emotionally involving for us is that sometimes a part of yourself comes out with a person that you just haven't accessed before. And it can be quite like, oh my God, I can't get this part of myself without that person. And we think, I can only get that ecstatic feeling with that person. And I've had a client recently who had a very intense love relationship and then basically became like addicted to the person or felt all this rush in their body from having that connection with the person and was not able to get over that. So sometimes sex brings up such deep feelings of loving yourself or connecting to a part of yourself that you just can't get by yourself. So I think it's important to love the self, and that's the basis. But what happens is, especially with kids, they're just experiencing their sexuality and they're exploring a new thing, and it's so exciting. There's also a level of sexual education, I think, that we can start to bring into our society about when you experience these feelings, you have an ability to talk about it or to discuss things with a partner, because we don't talk about sex. And I've always been a talker because I wasn't allowed to do anything from an Italian family. I used to talk a lot about sex. And that's where I found I could actually start to express with my girlfriends and my friends, you know, what are you experiencing in sex? And that way I could process the intensity of the experience. And I didn't necessarily talk about it with my partners because I think sex is a non-verbal communication. But I did sort of start to see that even if I have this intense connection with someone sexually, it's not everything in love. It's certainly one aspect of love, and I talk about a spectrum of love when I train in love and relationships. Sex is a part of a spectrum of love. And yes, it brings people together and it's tantalizing and it can be magical, that seventh heaven. It can be all of that. But we're not all relationships are meant to be like greater than sex. They're not meant to be that pinnacle of sex. I think we need to see that having expectations that sex life should be perfect or some sort of level is actually not the benefit of how sex can be in a relationship. But going back to what Mulan's saying about developing, and Jonathan, about developing that sense of connection to the person, that's the essence and key of relationship. And sometimes I've found a lot of people are getting that through intense sexual connections without even knowing the person. So that's where the real confusion can come in, because you might have a really strong sexual connection and that gives the illusion of being a foundation of something big. But really it's because you're actually opening up to that seventh heaven experience, maybe for the first time, or maybe for the first time since your last bonded relationship. And we all crave that bond. We all crave that big bond. I get that bond through different things, not just sex. I have dance, I have my spiritual work, I have certain friends in my life that connect me to it, animals. I get that bond on many ways. And I think people are either, like we're saying, like too mechanistic about sex, or they're too like wanting sex to be this experience with their partner, when really it's just, especially in a long-term relationship, sex becomes something that you really have to really engage in to make exciting. And we need to start being more open-minded about sex, how it's actually a potential. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be mechanistic. And that means talking. I really am an advocate of talking about sex, because I think we really have people that teach tantra and the sexual arts, but the everyday person, we don't really talk about it. And it's almost like it's either about being straight or gay or transsexual or something in between. But what about just like, hey, I don't really feel connected to my partner right now, and I'm looking at ways to try and get a better connection to them, but I don't know how, or we're not really having enough sex, or things like that. Like, what are the key things that are people struggling with when they want to build a connection?
But don't you think it's important to talk about it? Like,
With your partner?
yeah. Yeah, it's like, because I mean, it's like in a relationship, right? So you have certain needs. I find that 99% of the problems of people is miscommunication. So if we're in a relationship and I am not brave enough or courageous enough or strong enough to tell you what I need or what I want, most likely you will not give it to me because you don't know. I didn't say that. I tried to hint it. I tried to play a certain game so maybe you would understand, but I didn't say it clearly, right? And if I didn't say it clearly, most likely my partner would not know. But what if we could actually be really honest with each other and say, hey, this is what I like? It doesn't have to be, I mean, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, like feel free to reject this, but what if during sex we could be honest and say, I love this, and ooh, I don't like this, but I like this. Like if you could kiss me more, or hug me more, or caress me, or do whatever. Every person has their own, you know, preferable ways to do this. But what if we could actually be honest and really talk about it? Don't you think that it will be most likely we can reach seventh heaven? Of course, it doesn't have that seventh heaven, that place doesn't have to be a place, especially in long-term relationship. I agree. It doesn't have to be this place that we always meet each other, but at least we know we have the potential to get there. And I think the way to get there physically, emotionally, and spiritual is through communication, through like being honest and say what are my needs, and be open enough to learn about my partner needs. And that's where you could build that connection.
What I've found is that people who have the most active sex life tend to be great at talking about their needs, but other people who are not as comfortable, they're not great at talking, and some partners don't want to hear it. They just like, even if you tell a man sometimes, and I'll ask Jonathan's feedback on this, even if you tell a man what your needs are sometimes, if they don't know what to do, how to please you, it actually can bring a lot of stress and pressure on the man, because then he's like, oh, I don't know if I'm doing a good job. And even if you tell him that's great, that's great, that's great, but it's not quite working for you, some couples have actual technical difficulties in sex. And that's where I find that there's a lot of problems, where some people just, click sexually and other people don't. And you can still love a person, but not quite click sexually. And that's where there's a lot of, even if you're talking, it doesn't always quite work.
I have so much to say about that from a personal experience. I'm not sure, like I could share, but I just don't want to. I don't know if Jonathan wants to say something, but uh,
I mean, whatever you want. I mean, obviously, I have plenty to say in response to what you both said, but you're welcome to share your experience, Mulan.
yeah, like I'll just share like quickly, because I really think our listeners can really learn from it, and I'm fired up by this. I've been in a relationship for 13 years with my best friend, with someone I loved deeply, truly. Love of two souls that met in this lifetime and had to choose not to be in a relationship. After 13 years, I called off my wedding 30 days before our actual date. And one of the reasons I did that is because sexually we weren't compatible at all. And I'm going to say this, I was debating, but I'm going to say this, that after, it's been 4 years since then, and my ex is the happiest person he's ever been in his life. I met him when I was 16, and we broke up when I was 29 and he was 30. And today, 4 years after, he's been living with a man for 2 years, and he is the happiest I've ever seen in my life. And if I had the courage to look into this relationship in the eye, but square in the eye, and admit that this is not working and it shouldn't be this way, I wouldn't spend so much precious time for me and for him. And I think that, unfortunately, if people really love one another but they don't click sexually, unfortunately, from my experience, I would say choose to stay friends. Choose to be good friends. Don't choose each other as partners for life, because you're going to be miserable and you're going to make the other person miserable. And you know what? This is not love. Love is not about misery. Love is beautiful. Love is the reason people exist. Love is the reason everything exists. Everything has love. And if you stay with someone just because you love them, but you can't give them what they need, this is not love. This is fear. This is the wrong reason to stay in a relationship. This is because you're too fearful to let that person go, because you're addicted to them, or because you need them, or because you're dependent on their love and not on the true love that exists within you, that divine, infinite love that created you and created this world. I just, sorry, I had to say it, and share this with the world, because I think it's a very valuable information for people who are listening right now and at this specific moment really suffer and have this ping pong in their head. Should I? Shouldn't I? Should I? Shouldn't I? Should I? Shouldn't I? I've been there for too long. And I could say it's not a nice place to be at. And love and sex and intimate relationships should be this amazing flow of sharing energy and shouldn't be this misery and yucky feeling of like we're not compatible. If we're not compatible in bed, then we could be good friends, but we shouldn't be partners. Does that make sense?
I appreciate you sharing that, Mulan, because that was really that was an important point to be conveyed here. That if something feels off, then something is off, and people can be happier if they're listening to themselves. So obviously, you're able to see that very concretely. If if you're getting along really well, except when it comes to sex, then that's what friendships are.
Exactly.
That's
Exactly.
pretty straightforward, like right there. Like it's good that you listen to the cues. Obviously, you see that that the end result is that people are happier because people listen to themselves. If you're, as far as the like speaking up, communicating about what you want, I agree with you, Milan, that that's really important. And in response to what Angela is saying, I would say that if you're having trouble speaking up, if someone's having trouble speaking up about what they want when it comes to sex, then they're probably having trouble speaking up about what they want when it comes to other things also. And if that's happening, then it means that they're not listening to themselves in some way, and they're in some situation that they probably shouldn't be, whether it's in the relationship or it's in a job and it's being reflected in the relationship or whatever, where they're not listening to themselves. And when we don't listen to our own thoughts, feelings, and instincts about things, then they're afraid to speak up to us, and then we end up afraid to speak up to others. And then when we're then as far as the miscommunication that often occurs, that Mulan was saying is the problem in most 99% of relationships, which I agree with that. All types of relationships, not just romantic relationships. That the miscommunications that occur are the result of miscommunications with ourselves when we're not listening to what's right for us in the moment, and we're trying to force something that isn't working, whether it's that relationship or it's that friendship or it's that job or it's I really should be doing this, or this should work, or why isn't this working, but maybe I should just work harder. If it doesn't feel right, if something feels off, and we're in that ping pong ball experience like Milan described, if that's happening, we probably shouldn't even be there, because we don't have that ping pong ball experience when we're in the right place. When we're in the right place, it feels like there are more things to address. We move forward. There are other things that we could do to grow, but it doesn't feel like we're questioning whether we should even be here. When we're in a place where we're questioning whether we should even be here, we probably shouldn't be here. And if we don't listen to that, then it leads to all sorts of miscommunications with others, that where we're afraid to speak up because we're not listening to ourselves, and we don't have the confidence to speak up to ourselves, let alone to others, and we're not asserting what's good for us, and so then people don't know how to please us in any form, whatever the situation is. And so the solution in all this is what Mulan demonstrated with that example very well. The solution in all this is just to listen to ourselves. And what I meant when I was saying, because Angela, you made some good points with obviously we're going to be exploring things with another person and another person's body, and like we learn new things about ourselves, and it unlocks different parts of us. What I meant by being on kissing terms with ourselves, or sex terms, intimate terms with ourselves, is that if we're in a place where we're listening to ourselves, where we're really present to ourselves, we're only staying in situations when it feels right for us, we're leaving situations if it doesn't feel right for us, and moving into ones that do feel right for us. If we're actually on those terms with ourselves, where we're really listening to ourselves, where we can be close to ourselves without fear of us lashing out at ourselves, where our thoughts, feelings, instincts can speak up and not be afraid that they're going to disappoint us, because we're going to shut down, not listen to them, because it's like, no, I'm going to stay in this relationship whether you like it or not, feelings, I don't care that you're saying this feels off, because this is what's going to happen. If that's what we're doing to ourselves, then we end up playing out those same dynamics with other people, where we're afraid to say anything because we're afraid of disappointing someone, or having things not go well, or having them not understand or not be receptive to us, because that's what we're doing to ourselves. So if we were to just listen to ourselves in all situations, then we would be guided to people we would feel more comfortable speaking up with, and we wouldn't be as inclined to push ourselves aside for the sake of the other person. But even when we're with the right person, obviously it's up to us to be willing to recognize that we're always inclined as human beings and beings in this world and whatever, we're inclined to, to adapt to other people in some form and lose ourselves in the process. When we try to connect with someone, and even, we could be having a conversation with someone and have trouble cutting it off because we don't want to hurt the other person, or because they're in the middle of saying something, and even though it's really time for us to go, we just have, we can have trouble getting out of that conversation. I mean, let alone sex. I mean, like, obviously, just the conversation. So obviously, if we're paying too much attention to the other person, so this is obviously in response to what you were both saying before, if we're paying too much attention to the other person and not enough attention to ourselves, that's where we end up with situations where we feel like the fulfillment's coming from them, that we get addicted to them, that we feel even more like we need to please them, and that it's out of the question that we're going to leave them, even if our feelings say this isn't a good idea, we shouldn't be here. And then we create problems, obviously, that get reflected in sex and everything else, and every dynamic that we have with the person. But it's interesting that there are very clear cues when it seems like, something's off in a particular area. Then we ought to ask ourselves, what does this say? So, like, if it's off in sex but nothing else, then that probably shouldn't be someone we're having sex with. If something's off, when it comes to, if we're traveling a lot for work and we keep having problems when it comes to traveling, like issues at the airport and issues on the road and accidents and everything, we probably shouldn't be in that job, or we shouldn't be traveling. Like, when there are clear things that are not working out, then if we were to listen to ourselves, then we would realize that we're not fully resonant with being there. And then we can get out of the ping pong experience, and we can actually just say, this is what's good for me. And then we can step into situations that are good for us, where we feel confident speaking up, and then we can have experiences where we could feel confident actually communicating what our needs are and what our wants are. And then we could actually be attentive to our own needs in a way that allows us to be attentive to the other person, not because we're, trying to please the other person at the expense of ourselves, but because we're trying to please the other person because we're already with ourselves. And it's just the overflow of that. It's easier to then be present to the other person because we're already present to ourselves, and we don't have anything in us vying for our attention, taking us away from the experience with the other.
I love that. I love that. It's so true. So true.
Yeah.
So is there anything you guys want to add before we wrap this up? I mean, obviously you can say whatever you want. Obviously, whatever. I want you guys to feel like you've completed whatever. Obviously there are things to respond to potentially. So
I just want to say that like what Angela said, that there is such a large spectrum for sex and love and relationships and like everything in life, right? Like, you want to be healthy. There are so many layers for health until you really feel like you found the right path for you. And I think sex is such a personal, delicate, fragile area that so many people are afraid to talk about because, oops, like, what if I am being inappropriate? Me being Israeli and have the Israeli chutzpah, which is like that extra spice, makes it easy for me to talk about that. But also my personal story has to do a lot with listening to my true self, and it manifested in it sexually. So I had my problem came through that. So that's why it's easier for me to talk about it in my workshops and the work that I do with clients. And at the beginning, when I started this business, I attracted a lot of women who had experienced the same problem. And today, not as much, because I really overcame it, and I feel like very congruent with who I am and what I want, and I can restrict myself. I can fast for 40 days or 10 days, whatever I need, whatever I feel I need. I think the most important thing and the key for life and to have a relationship, if it's whether our listeners that listen right now are singles or in a relationship or married or divorced or widowed, whatever your situation is, the most important thing to remember is that the truth, the absolute truth, is absolute. There is no doubt about your truth. whatever is really, really true in your core would be true regardless of life experiences and what life is going to give you. So if you tune in and you quiet the other demons and the voices around, and you connect to that true self, that higher self, the price you will pay following that truth would be a lot less pricey compared to if you know the truth, but if you choose to go against it anyway. There is always a price. Always. The question is which one is higher? Guaranteed. I guarantee my words, and I stand 100% solid behind this, that if you don't follow the truth, the price you will pay will be so much worse than what you have to gain by choosing this path. So there are two ways to choose. One is love, the other one is fear. If you choose fear, life is just going to keep bringing that. But if you choose courageously to step up and choose the love, first of all, for yourself. Love yourself enough, more than anything else, to make that decision if to stay in a relationship, to take it to the next level, or to let it go. As scary as it sounds, all the voices inside are going to get shut down once you listen to your truth. There's no time to spend in being ambivalent about anything. The only time that you have is right now, and you have all the power that you need to create any changes in your life, believe it or not. I was the most fearful person before I took this decision, and my life would not be the same without this courageous decision that I took 4 years ago. Completely changed my life for the better, so much better, and so much more open with myself and who I am. I really wish that for every person I know.
I like that. Thank you.
Angela, do you want to say anything?
Going back to the spectrum of sex and looking at long-term relationships as well, because I think one of the things people struggle with the high rate of divorce and breakups is that once you do lose a sexual attraction or understanding or relationship with each other, that's a different process to, like, if something's not working and whether you leave the relationship because something's not in alignment. So to become aware of it, like Mulan's saying, that inner voice, that's the journey itself. That's the most important journey, especially when things are not working in your relationship, whether it's sex, whether it's unresolved arguments or pain or problems with the kids and things. You have that opportunity at that time to really keep perpetuating that cycle of conflict and the ping pong thing. I love Jonathan's analogy of the ping pong in your brain, or you have the choice.
I just want to point out that was Mulan's analogy originally. That was.
Oh, sorry. I thought you said it. And yeah. At that point, if you're in a relationship, it's not about choosing to stay or leave sometimes. It's about choosing to find that truth, that space where you can feel, look, what is actually coming up for me here? Because a long-term relationship's going to make you go through the growth, and it's not going to be easy. And that's what we want, that deeper bond and connection. And the only way you get the deeper bond sometimes is by sticking it out with someone and feeling, okay, what's my truth here? And how do I support my partner's truth or my children's truth? And sometimes you might have to leave to get a better stability for the head of the children. So it's really, in long-term relationships, looking at what is coming up for me, what can I do here to get out of the ping pong? Because I think a lot of conflict comes up in long-term relationships where we just think, I can't end this relationship because it's a stability factor here. And definitely we want to support couples to stay together. So there's got to be a way to resolve problems in sex and to resolve emotional hurt where we can help couples really go through what's coming up. But the only way to do it is to do what Milan's saying, find that place, cut out the noise, get in there. What am I feeling? How can I heal this hurt that I can't get over my partner with, you know? And that's the work of relationships. When I said in the beginning that sex is what pulls us together, love is the meaning we give to it, relationships is the process, it's a journey. And in long-term relationships, you've got to stick it out and you've got to say, this is my commitment in the journey to myself, to my truth, and to support my partner's truth as well. So it's not just about me, me, me.
Agreed. Yeah.
I would actually, I agree with most of that. I would like to be free to disagree a little. I'd like to say that different people have different obstacles. Obviously, there are people who are too inclined to pay too much attention to themselves in a certain way, too inclined to pay too much attention to other people and not enough to themselves. There are people, so there are people who are inclined to stay in relationships even when they're terrible and really shouldn't be staying, and there are people who are inclined to leave like moments into it and like never stick out anything, and there's no commitment. And so I think that it's often a danger to make blanket statements sometimes. Well, I just said often sometimes because I'm trying to modify and like soften this. But yeah, often. I think it's often a danger to say that that we should simply work on sticking out relationships, or that we should simply let them go. I think we represented both here because Mulan pointed out an example where we would let go, and Angela is emphasizing that we should really work on things. And ultimately, I think it depends on the situation. It depends on the, obviously the specific people. Depends on, if something's really feeling off, then obviously we see a good example of this in Mulan, that if something's feeling off, then we should listen to that. That's the ideal. Then we could have everyone be happier. If it's feeling off, and we let go of that relationship and opt for the possibility of a much better one for both of you. And, alternatively, if it's something where people are just not facing themselves, and the relationship is showing them themselves, and they still haven't addressed certain things, and that's why the relationship isn't good, and it's not yet time to say let's drop the relationship because there are issues, but it's actually time to say, okay, let's face myself here, in the mirror of my significant other, mirror of my partner. So I think that ultimately the only blanket statement I would be inclined to make in this regard would be to say, first, we face ourselves and see what it's bringing up for us and address these things in ourselves. And then once we've addressed what's coming up for us, what the mirror of our partner is reflecting back at us, once we've addressed those things in ourselves and we no longer have those dynamics in us that we're not liking, then we see, did my partner change to reflect my new dynamic with myself? Or is there still a conflict? Is there still something feeling off? Now that I've addressed what it showed me, does it still feel off? And if it still feels off, then we're in the situation like with Mulan, where we could stay for 13 years, but it's still going to feel off, And so alternatively, and then it would make more sense and would feel better, and we would step out of living in fear if we were to just listen to ourselves. And alternatively, if we really haven't faced ourselves yet, then we're still in the right place. And it makes sense to work on the relationship because we're still learning and growing from it, and we're not yet at the point, if it's ever to come in that particular situation, where we're saying, I've addressed this in me, and it's not so much that I'm not liking my partner as that there's just something off. It's just these are not dynamics that I'm resonant with anymore, and this person isn't treating me better when I'm treating myself better. And I feel like this just isn't where I'm supposed to be. That's where we get to like that ping pong ball like experience where we're back and forth and we don't know what to do. And when we're in that place, then it's probably because we've addressed a lot of this stuff in ourselves and we're still where we were, and it's not relevant to us anymore to stay there because we've outgrown the mirror and we're trying to hold on to it. And ultimately we would be better off letting go of that mirror and taking on a new one, or changing the nature of that mirror for us. Maybe it's meant to be a different type of relationship, and then letting some other mirror fulfill the reflection, reflect back the way we're treating ourselves in that particular context. And I also, in this same vein of stepping out of living in fear, since I didn't mention before the 40-day fast idea, the key in making something like that work well would be to focus on something other than, like Mulan pointed out here, that we want to shift from fear to love. Our focus should be love, ideally, and not fear. And so it's not that we would focus on not interacting with the opposite gender or the same gender or whatever it is that we're attracted to. It's not avoiding that. It's actually choosing something else. And then that gets back to like what Angela was saying, change your behaviors, change how you're treating yourself, like more than wash the person out of your hair, that we actually start making changes to ourselves and treat ourselves better and use the time that we're taking ourselves away from what ultimately is an escape from ourselves, where we're interacting with people looking for something that we're really wanting in ourselves, and we take a step back and we say, okay, I'm just going to step out of that and give myself what I'm wanting instead of looking for it outside me. And it's only when I take the time to give it to myself that I'm ever going to get it outside me, and that's my explanation for why that 40-day fast works so well for your client, Mulan, because ultimately, or this person you're describing, because ultimately this person stepped back from operating, where she was looking outside herself for this love, and then it also changes completely when you're talking on the phone versus in person. Obviously, you have the opportunity to develop a relationship that's beyond the physical when it's the phone, and we also tend to be attracted to different things when we're speaking to a person versus when we see a person. And so it's an interesting thing, obviously, what phones do that we didn't have, obviously, 100 years ago, people were not, or like 200 years ago, people weren't meeting each other online and on phones and on Skype, and obviously it changes things because it leads us to feel that different things might be right, where we might have been like, oh, physical attraction, all right, I've got everything. And then obviously, but if you're meeting someone on the phone, that's not the only thing staring you in the face.
Yeah,
now
but look at that, like the universe just sent her that because she wasn't into that, to making that physical connection anymore, and she was willing to cut it off, to change her nature, so she could get something else. Yeah. And that's like everything in life, right? Our behavior, we just attract more attract alike, so we just attract more of that.
Right. Well, she obviously shifted into loving herself more and was able to bring love into her life rather than always trying to, be there for another person and try to get some kind of love. She obviously, if she was not going to be approaching that for 40 days, then she needed to find the love somewhere else. It gave her time to say, okay, time to look within, find it in me. And then that's why it would fit so well that she would be able to experience that outside her like that. It's a good story, though. It's obviously very illustrative of this, take some time to be with yourself and then find someone outside yourself who reflects what you are liking with yourself.
Yeah, because when you have, when you're in that level, then you're going to attract a person in that level. You want to improve, right? You want to get better. So you want to attract a person in that level. So if you think your soulmate or someone that you need to be with is there, then that's where you need to aim. You need to do some work. You need to do some changes so you can attract that into your life.
Yeah, definitely. Do you have anything you want to, I just like responded to things you were saying, Angela, so is there anything you want to respond to? And
I think it's another conversation, because it's a big piece on what is love. So I think that's definitely a different conversation.
That's for the next time. That's for the next one. I have so much more to say, but I mean, we'll have to keep it for the next conversation.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you so much for this conversation. This was great.
Thank you. This was awesome. This was amazing. Thank you.
Have a great night and good day, and thank you everyone for watching. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.